Good afternoon. Hope you all had lots of coffee in the break so that you're going to stay awake for this. I'm going to try and keep you awake, but it's the kind of graveyard slot, so good luck. PE International is an international life cycle assessment and sustainability consultancy. We reckon we have the largest number of sustainability consultants in the world, and over 2,000 years of experience. We cover life cycle assessment for all types of products, not just construction. So we deal with food, automotive, consumer goods, electronics as well. But I specialise in construction. Quickly, it's been explained, but obviously construction products do have an impact on the environment. We're used to thinking about buildings and the energy that they consume, but certainly as we move towards zero carbon buildings, the importance of the construction materials we use becomes more and more important. And this is data from Germany, just looking at building today, the amount of energy that's used in operation compared to the amount from the materials. So already in Germany, we're talking about a significant proportion of the building impact with current German construction regulation coming from the materials. And you can see there as well that the impact of manufacturing materials is that blue kind of 25%. But you do have a significant amount of impact from the transport of materials, the disposal of materials, and the replacement of materials. So it is not just about manufacturing goods, it is about thinking about the life cycle of the building. And obviously, as we move towards zero carbon construction, then effectively the only impact that we should be having from our buildings is from the materials that we're using. And so obviously we need to start looking at that and seeing what we can do to reduce impact there as well. How has the industry reacted to this sort of emphasis on materials? And I think certainly sometimes people imagine that they are doing nothing. That isn't really the case. There's been a huge raft of standards, international standards and then European standards that have been produced and which are being used across sort of Europe in particular, looking at life cycle assessment of all products and in construction materials in particular. And construction is actually one of the areas where I think we're actually very advanced. We have standards specifically focused at undertaking life cycle assessment for construction products that have been around since the kind of mid-2000s, the mid-noughties. And I've been involved in the development of European standards to actually focus on producing life cycle assessment of construction products on a European level. And that the driver for that has been the fact that there have been schemes in the UK, in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the Nordic regions, that all have different rules and different mechanisms and different methods of assessment. And for manufacturers and for architects and people using materials, the fact that these assessment methods don't align with one another, it is very problematic and a barrier to trade. So this new standard, EN 15804, which is part of the TC 350 standards for sustainable construction, is intended and will produce a common platform, if you like, for the production of environmental information for construction materials. So this standard was published, certainly it was published in the UK in late February, and means now that the schemes are all gradually adopting this and that data will be available across Europe that is comparable, consistent, robust and transferable. So we're in a pretty good position now relative to if I'd been talking to you 2 or 3 years ago. In terms of terminology, LCA, life cycle assessment, it's a study of products looking at a range of environmental impacts and over the whole life cycle. So as I mentioned for construction products, manufacture is very important, but the use stage, the maintenance of them, the disposal of them is also key. And looking for construction products at the way that they're used in buildings, the benefits that they have or the impacts that they have on the way that the building performs is highly relevant, and also so life cycle assessment is a concept to look at these products. What we've done in construction is to produce what we call environmental product declarations, or EPD, which enable us to, if you like, go a step beyond life cycle assessment to assess products in a consistent way and report that information in a consistent way so that you can compare or you can add together the impact of the individual products to get a building level assessment. And if there's one thing I would like to say is that although you can look at products and choose good products over bad products, that's really only appropriate where those products are doing exactly the same thing. If you're comparing two different blocks, for example, and they have a different thermal performance, it's not relevant to look at or you can't look at the impact of manufacturing those blocks in isolation and choose which one has the lowest impact. You need to understand the impact they're going to have in the building. That's the same if they have different thermal mass, and that's going to have an impact on the building. It's the same if they're actually going to have different service lives, or if they're going to be disposed of differently, if they have different wastage. All of these things need to be considered, and the way that the building works is what is essential. And the European standards, what is sort of one of the core principles, if you like, is, for example, that the CO2 that you produce in manufacturing a building product is not really considered in any way differently from the CO2 that you produce out of your boiler when you burn gas. It's all the same CO2, and you shouldn't look at these things completely in isolation. You want to produce a building that minimises its CO2 emissions, whether it comes from the materials or it comes from the operation of the systems. And we need to be designing good buildings. You can produce terrible buildings out of great materials. So, you can choose entirely eco-labelled buildings and produce a building that will not perform. Just be aware of that. In terms of availability of life cycle assessment data, there isn't very much life cycle assessment data in Ireland. That's absolutely true. But there are a lot of schemes operating across Europe, and there is data, for example, from BRE in France, in Spain, in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland, and in Germany, which does give you a good idea of the impact of manufacturing different types of products. So it's not exactly what you might be getting if you manufactured it in Ireland, but it gives you a good idea of how different products compare. There are also construction LCA databases. There's a European Life Cycle Assessment database, there's a Swiss national database, a German database, Gabi, which is a paid-for, both Eco-Invent and Gabi you have to pay for. Oka Baudat you can download free, is the German national construction database. There's a Dutch database which you can download. There's an Austrian database, and the BRE have one, although it's not publicly available. All of this information, I wrote a book with the Construction Products Association in the UK. This is a paper version, a short version of it, but you can download this free of charge from the Construction Products Association website, and I'll show you the link later. This has all these links, it has these diagrams. It tells you a lot more than I can give you in half an hour. So there is LCA data. In terms of currently what do environmental product declarations look like, they do vary quite considerably until, they probably still all look different, but there is a really big difference at the moment before the standards, if you like, have come through. So a UK environmental product declaration is 2 pages, one of which is a certificate, the other which gives you very minimal information about what's been assessed at a kind of elemental level and just reports the impact indicators. At the other extreme, if you like, the international EPD, which is run from Sweden, they're normally a 20-page document. They have lots of pictures, they have lots of graphs, they have a lot of data, a lot of information, technical information about the product, descriptions of the manufacturing process. And the different schemes that run, basically, they all vary and they have different things. The European standard is, if you like, setting out the minimum core information that will need to be provided, which is sort of somewhere between the two of these. But that there's nothing to stop you producing a great deal more information and using your EPD effectively as much more of a marketing and an informative document if you want to. In terms of the process of getting an EPD, EPDs need to be produced by environmental product declaration programs. You can set one up as a trade association if you want, or a national scheme. But you basically have to set one up. You have to set rules, your product category rules, which set out how you're going to assess everything. And you have to have those reviewed to make sure that you're setting up a scheme that, if you like, is robust and fair and not obviously set up to show that your product is fantastic. And you have to have a system of verification in place. So you can do that as a trade association, and that's been done by a couple, but most of the schemes are national. You need to choose a scheme. At the moment, that's normally your national scheme, but once the European standards come into place, effectively, your EPD will be a passport that you can take into the different countries, and the data for your manufacturing process should be usable wherever you take it. Your product might be used differently, it might be disposed of differently in different countries. There's obviously going to be different impacts of transporting it to different places. But the manufacturing impacts stay the same, and that, if you like, is a passport that you can use across Europe, and that's key to the standards. To undertake the LCA, you need to collect data for your products, for your manufacturing process, and potentially you can work with your suppliers to get better data, or use generic data for the input materials that you're using. It then is modelled to do the life cycle assessment, and the impacts are calculated. That's generally something that's done in LCA software. Sorry, I'm going backwards. Generally something that's done in LCA software by LCA practitioners, but there are some companies that have that expertise in-house. That's increasingly so more in the continent, for example. And then you create your EPD with the results of that data. You provide a report that sets out exactly what you've done, how you've met the product category rules, what your results are, and that's provided to the verifier for them to check that the process has been gone through, that the data makes sense, and the EPD is a good representation of the product. So that's basically the process that's gone through. As I mentioned before, there is now this European standard which is setting core rules to fix the methodology, basically, so that there will be a consistent way of evaluating products and reporting their impacts that will be used wherever you do this. And there are increasingly, for BREEAM in the UK has agreed that it will take this on board and produce 15804 compliant methodology later this year. The German EBU scheme is already doing this. Envirodec has taken it on board and is working towards it. The French are looking at it. So this is progressively, this is happening and being adopted. This is effectively what is going to happen from now on. And this standard links to a standard for measuring the impact at the building level, basically being able to add these product level EPDs till you get an EPD, if you like, for your building, looking at the whole life cycle. And there are parallel work streams doing the same type of thing for whole life costing and economic assessment of buildings, and also social assessment of products and buildings. And eventually these three work streams will work together, and there will be a sustainability product declaration for products that will take these three sets of data to enable you to produce a sustainability assessment of your building that would then, for example, be able to feed into schemes like BREEAM or DGNB or LEED. Just in terms of the process of the building level assessment, it is not just about producing the products. It does take into account, it goes all the way back for all the impacts that are associated with manufacturing your product, generating the energy, extracting the minerals, growing the timber that you're using, transporting that, disposing of your waste, building the building, maintaining the building, operating the building, and then at the end of life, disposing of the building and recycling or disposing of the materials. All of that is effectively taken into consideration within the standards. As I say, when you actually undertake the life cycle assessment, you normally use LCA software, and there are quite a range of them. This is done at the product level, at the building level. There are now a number of tools. So, for example, there are free tools available in France. Again, they're listed in here that you can use that do building level LCA. The Dutch have just developed one for use in Bremen, Netherlands, and to link the Dutch, for example, are one of the first countries that are actually regulating in this area. So in Holland, you will now need to produce a building level calculation of your embodied carbon and your resource use for your building materials if you're building a house or an office over 100 metres squared. There aren't benchmark levels set, but you will have to calculate and report that data to the standards. And so that's in place now, that's gone through. In France, if you want to market your product on any environmental performance claim, you will need to have an EPD that you have lodged with the government. And that's still going through, but if that comes through, that will come into place. And these will link through to these European EPD. So this is not the future, this is happening elsewhere already. In terms of the impact assessment, you're basically looking at all the emissions that you're producing, the resources that you're using, and linking those to the environmental impacts that are happening. And that's effectively how you're quantifying the environmental impacts that are associated with your products. And the standard is measuring 22 indicators, which sort of sounds like an awful lot, but most of the LCA softwares are able to produce these indicators. They have the data within them to produce these. And therefore it's actually no more difficult to produce sort of one indicator than the 22 that we're measuring. So it's also looking at resources, water use, for example, water footprinting becoming increasingly relevant in a lot of areas. And then resource indicators relating to the amount of recycled or reused material that you're generating from your building and energy that you're able to generate from the building. And you're also looking at the waste you're producing, for example. How is this being used? What more is actually happening? And there are quite a lot of initiatives I think it's worth being aware of. So, for example, we've worked with Zumtobel, the lighting manufacturer. You might know them as Thorn, as their big brand, certainly in the UK. Their online catalogue of more than 10,000 products, you can get an EPD for every single one of them. So there is data available for the products that you may think it's too complicated. It's now possible to do this type of thing with the tools that we have. World Steel, for example, we've worked with them to gather data from all their production sites and to effectively automate the process of being able to report for their products. The aluminium industry, we've worked with them to produce a tool that can produce bespoke EPDs for their products, for their member companies. So it takes the data for manufacturing that they've collected and then can produce EPDs for individual windows that manufacturers are producing. For Calzip, they have a generic EPD for their typical product that they produce, but we've also produced a system for them so that an architect can ask for an EPD that actually covers exactly the thickness, the coating, the amount of insulation, the type of insulation, the lining system that they've specified, the fixing systems that they've specified in their building, and at the touch of a button they can effectively get an EPD for that particular product. So this is the type of process we're going through with a lot of the manufacturers that we work with. And with EarthMe, the Resilient Flooring Manufacturers Association, you can basically go to their website and get an EPD for a product based on the way you're expecting to use it in your building, in terms of how long you're expecting it to last and the type of product specification that you're taking. So that there's a lot of kind of technology that is there. As I mentioned, this is the guide. There's a great deal in there. The feedback that we've had so far is it's an easy and a good read, and there's lots of data there. So there is a link there. I do have quite a lot of these short summary versions available if anybody would like to pick one up. And there is a link on the back page to the full document. So this short version, only 8 pages, is a real summary of the longer document. So please come and pick one up if you'd be interested. And that's it. Thank you very much.